So I just thought we'd start, enough about you. Tell us about Highland Park. What is your experience here?
I was a yeshiva girl in Highland Park when I was 3 years old until I was 5 years old, and the only thing I have from there is my American accent. That is a bit still there. Yeah, but my father did his postdoc, and they put me in a Jewish school because they thought that would be easier. But I want to visit again one day. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, if we could start, just tell us a little bit how the film came about.
The film. So I made my first film, which is called Farewell, Herr Schwarz in English. Was about my family. It was about the story of the Holocaust, my grandmother's story, and how she was separated from her brother, and it really dealt through a very private story through that with that. So the question, what exactly did we inherit from this story, and what did it make with us as a family? And after I was finished with that film, I knew I wanted to move forward in time and deal with Israel. So we had, Second World War, and now I was ready to arrive in 1948. And, speaking about Israel is always very, very complicated. It's really like a minefield. Like, how do you speak with all the love and respect, but also with all the pain and the criticism, and how, and how do you really talk about us? And it took me a while to realize I really want to deal with that, like with that us, which is for me, the people I grew up with, and it started with the stepson who's sleeping there. He started first grade, and I told him I was also once in first grade, and these are, and we're all grown up now. We're going to be 40. And that's how it started. That's how the idea came to be.
Was it hard to reconnect with all your old schoolmates? Were you still in touch with them?
I wasn't in touch with anybody, but with the magical powers of social media, it was fairly easy, especially since many of them, and I didn't know this, many of them stayed where we grew up. So even the ones who changed their names or were difficult to find, then I found one and then asked, do you know where this person is? And they were like, oh, our kids are in the same kindergarten. So, and the ones who weren't, and I asked my mom, said, oh, I met her mom in the supermarket. So they stayed, many of them stayed very close by, and definitely their parents are still in the neighborhood, many of them.
Did everyone you approached agree to participate, or did you had were there some people not at the photo shoot?
There were some people we filmed and are not in the film. And there were other people who I approached and didn't want to take part. I think it was much easier to get the women to talk than the men. And I don't know if it's because I am a woman and it was easier for them to talk to me, or because I kind of came to them at a certain point where they were, I think nobody asked them how they were for a really long time, and they were really, we have a lot of very tired mothers in the film. And I think I came to them at a point where they were really ready to talk about where they are in life and how they feel about their life. And, yeah. Okay. So yeah.
Okay. So there was something that you didn't cover a whole lot, that at least my wife and I were then kind of asking, that we were curious about, like, what prompted you to move to Germany? That you didn't really go into depth in that in the film.
You have to go. First of all, you have to watch the first film for that. You have to watch Farewell, Herr Schwarz. I came to Germany. Actually, at first I didn't know why. I came here to visit a friend, and now 17 years ago in a few days. And there was something about Berlin that really amazed me. I mean, of course, it was hip and interesting and culturally interesting, but it was also really haunted by its history, and I felt I could really identify with that. And I've always been waiting to make a film about my relationship to my family's history, my family's Holocaust history. And when I came here, I realized I want to deal with that here. I couldn't deal with that from Israel. And that took me, I think it took me 7 or 8 years to make that first film.
Oh.
And they take a long time to make.
Well, you put down roots if you stay somewhere for 7 years.
How is that? Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans.
Yeah.
But mainly, I think it was then and still is now a good place for me to live in kind of an interesting distance, also creatively, from where I grew up. And so in the meantime, I'm a real Berliner, as strange as that may seem.
Right. I mean, you have most of your friends feel at home in Israel and would not feel at home abroad. And for you, it's the opposite. In what ways do you feel more at home in Berlin than in Israel?
I think, I mean, the city has changed also here, but I think the way, I mean, also in the meantime, I think I belong more in Berlin. I think to live as I live, to do, I mean, definitely it's very difficult to do creative work in Israel and have a normal life. I mean, financing is very difficult. Work is it's a tiny country with an enormous amount of talent. I think most of the films that you see in your series, I mean, it sounds very prosaic, but the directors it's almost a volunteer work. And that would be professionally very difficult. But also, I'm not, as you see in the film, I don't have children. I'm not a mother. I think women my age without children are not very common in Israel. It's about families. And I live a different life, and there are more people like me here.
Dudu, the DJ, doesn't seem troubled that he's a bachelor with no kids, but Shiri, who is single, feels that she's she may become a single mom.
Shiri has become a single mom in the meantime. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Is it harder to be a woman without children in Israel?
I think the social stigma of not having children in Israel is enormous.
Mm-hmm. More so than in Germany or in Europe.
In Berlin.
Yeah.
Berlin is
Berlin is not all of Germany necessarily.
No, Berlin is not all of Germany, but I think Israel is, in a strange way, more than the Israel that I grew up in. I think, and you see that very well in the film, the people my age in Israel, they're very busy with their, cocoons, these little
bubbles.
These bubbles, these capsules. They have more children than their parents had. Their homes are more beautiful than their parents' were. They're much less interested in the outside world, also because the outside world got so complicated and confusing in Israel. So I think it's a very people live in capsules. Yeah, very much. And in that, there's also something to envy that, I always say, like in Israel, nobody's ever alone, but also nobody's ever alone. So so there are pluses and minuses, and also it's only 4 hours. I'm there very often, usually to vote, but also to visit my family. Yeah.
Sarit, the interior designer, mentions that her European clients don't feel secure in Europe.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what she says. And yet, I get the sense that you feel more secure in Berlin than you would necessarily in Israel.
Well, I feel very secure in Israel. I'm a very privileged white, Jewish, upper middle class, educated, Ashkenazi enough girl. So my life in Israel is very shielded and protected. I don't feel in danger in Israel.
Oh, so that wasn't.
But in I mean, also, yeah, you have. I mean, life in Israel is complicated, but then again, somehow also safe. But here, I think Sarit is talking about. She has clients from France. France is very. I mean, Germany is very different. Germany, because of its past, my well-being as a Jewish person here is taken very, very seriously. Anti-Semitism is taken very, very seriously here. So usually if I say I'm from Israel, they say, "Oh, wie schön, how nice." Which is it's the flip side of that. It's also complicated, but I don't feel, I'm not afraid here as a Jew.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. Let me see if we get some other people. I had a question for everyone, and then maybe Yael has an answer. For the Hebrew title of the film was Petach Tikva, and the English title is Promised Lands, plural.
And the German title is Children of Hope.
Children of Hope. Okay. All right. So we were scratching our heads at Promised Land. So I wanted to see if anyone else in the audience has any theories, and then we'll see if anyone guessed. Anyone have any thoughts?
I'm sure somebody has a better answer than mine. No.
Okay.
No.
Well, go ahead. Do you want to reveal, or why? What are the lands?
I mean, I thought because I mean, we used to be more one land, but I think in the film, these capsules, right? Everybody has their own dreams, their own little utopia, their own little promised land. It was, Israel that I grew up was very collectivist. Can you say that in English?
Yeah.
And it kind of broke up into these micro worlds, and each one of these people has, with a backdrop of with the importance of this country and the miracle that it is, and the history and the responsibility of being something new, their own tiny, small, midlife crisis-y existence that is, we're much more in ourselves. Yeah, each with their own version of their promised land. So I think that's also, the film is somehow a lot about dreams and hopes and where people thought they would be and where they are, and where the country thought it would be and where it is, and what our parents wanted us to be and what we are. So yeah.
I was, you and I were speaking about this during our earlier rehearsal talk about just, how much of this is midlife crisis that anyone in their mid-40s might go through, and how much of it is the crisis of living in the Middle East. And I just wonder if audience members want to weigh in on this, I welcome your comments and thoughts.
I mean, I assume most of our audience here is Jewish. I think being Jewish is part of that very much. I think, I have, as you saw in the film, I have a German partner, and I'm like, it took me time to really understand the difference between us. And I think being Jewish anyway, but definitely being Israeli, where my psychology is collectivist. I'm not as, he's a complete individual, you know. He's much more free in his choices than I am, to the better and the worse, you know. He's also much more alone, you know, but we have, like, as Jews, as Israelis, we have so many responsibilities to our family, to our country, to our Judaism, to our, you know, it's not, it's much more difficult to walk, I think, a separate path. And I think the film shows that very much. There's a very high price when you do walk your separate path. So I think in that way, our midlife crisis, I mean, of course, there's something very, like, on one hand, I mean, I think my generation is just trapped between two sets of values. And one is this very, like, neoliberal, comfortable life, you know, Western American, whatever set of values. We work in high tech and we want to travel and we have internet and we speak English. And the other side is this very Israeli, we have to build, we have to give birth, we have to be, you know, we have to stay and create something here. We have a responsibility for this country. So I think somewhere so we stand somewhere in this, this space between these two sets of values. So I think if I look at my non-Israeli friends around, they're much more free, and for that reason, also their midlife crisis looks a bit different. Yeah.
Oh, so the politics affects the nature of the midlife crisis.
It's not only politics, right? We're children of ideology. You know, my father was born in Iraq. My grandparents from my mother's side came from Eastern Europe. Without Israel, they would have never met. Without this very strong ideology, you know, that was somehow when I started thinking about this film, I started thinking of myself as, you know, my very biology is like when my grandparents met, they were complete foreigners to each other. They were complete aliens, you know, a Lithuanian and a, you know, and an Iraqi Baghdadi. They have nothing in common. And within one generation, my parents met and thought it makes sense to get married and have kids. And it did make sense, you know, and they didn't give us like Arab or Yiddish names. They gave us Hebrew Israeli names, and we speak Hebrew at home. And this all happened very, very quickly. And it happened because of a strong need and a strong trauma, but also a very strong ideology. So it's not only politics. It's something much bigger and heavier and than politics. Yeah.
In a way, you've repeated their story of man finding a partner who's very much unlike yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think my parents, because they came to Israel as children, or my father came as a child and my mother was born in Israel, they went through this Israeli melting pot. You know, they were in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, Israel was doing like very aggressive work on making these kids forget where their parents came from and be ashamed and erase, you know. When my German partner and I meet, we know we're completely different. We come from completely different worlds, and there is no attempt to be the same, you know. And sometimes it's nice and sometimes it's more complicated, but you know.
Do you have Israeli friends as well in Berlin, or how?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's I always say I'm like the Mayflower of Israelis in Berlin, because a few years after I came here, there was this wave, you know, after this this Rothschild, you know, the tents, so in 2011, I think people started coming, so suddenly the city became full of Israelis. Some of them very, very, very interesting. I think there are like 3 newspaper magazines coming out in Berlin in Hebrew. now. It's the whole Philharmonic here, that's always been the case, is full of Israelis. A lot of classical musicians, a lot of academics and historians and artists and painters and filmmakers and writers.
And that's part of your social circle?
Yeah. And then the second wave were like real estate people and high tech. And so it's really, there are, I always think they're a bit like migrating birds because it gets very cold here in winter. So maybe they go back to Israel and maybe they're only here in summer. But there are people here. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You talk about promises that you made as children, and but a lot to how was that a device, or because I was just thinking you don't really hold children to those promises. They also promise they're going to buy the house next door to mommy and daddy and live there. So children make promises. How seriously should we take the promise, or how seriously do you take them?
I think we took them very, very seriously. I think we took them very seriously. Also, these, it's really funny because I live in East Berlin. I mean, not that it matters anymore, but this used to be East Berlin, and when I showed the film here, my East German friends were like, "Oh my God, that's exactly how we grew up. We sang about our country all the time. We spoke about how we're changing the world and building something new all the time." And then said, "But did you also get teary when you sang the songs?" And they said, "No, we already knew it was a bluff." When we were kids, the Eastern Bloc in the 80s, they didn't believe it anymore. But we were really, we would, in school, we had once a week agricultural day. We went to, plant potatoes in the land because, and we had, and this is the 80s, and we had every Friday, we would sit down with the whole school and do like this communal singing with like slides, and we would sing about Israel. And I remember thinking, we're all singing. I would really get excited about it. It was like my favorite time in the week. I really believed. And I think we all really believed. And we really, and in a way, we still really believe. And we went to the military and we fought and died and whatever. And we really, it's not, we took it very seriously as kids. And I think we still do now, strangely, because my boyfriend laughs at me every time I say, "I'm not buying another ticket to go to vote. I'm not going again. Like, I've been out of there for 17 years. Why did I fly back to Israel 5 times in the last 3 years just to go to vote?" But I do. So it's still, we're really indoctrinated. Yeah, it's like being a beehive, even if you fly far away, you hear the buzz,
You mentioned that yours is also the general and the title, the German title, Children of Hope, that yours is the first generation to lose hope. I'm wondering to what extent have they lost hope, and to what extent are they following the serenity prayer of God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. To what extent?
But they can change. They can change. They can go and vote and stand on the street and write a sign, and
right.
they can change. But I think I think we lost hope in the early 2000s with the second Intifada. I think it's a double thing, because we thought, and we're also a very privileged generation, because people who are younger than us, they don't know Israel with hope. They don't know Israel with peace process. They don't know Israel with a horizon or an idea that something can change. Even if it didn't work out, even if it was not a realistic plan, even if, there are many things that you can say about it. Maybe it was executed badly, but we really believe that we have a better future in this country. And that's a great privilege. And And the people who are 10 years younger than us, they don't know Israel with hope.
Mm.
And so in that way, we lost hope, but we also, it comes back to these promises, like they promised us peace. There's also this song, "Iftachtem Yonah," you promised a dove, a peace dove. Yeah, but who promised? It's our country. We have to do it. Like nobody. We're 43. If we don't do it, nobody does it. Like it's not like the grown-ups won't take care of this anymore.
You're in charge now.
We're in charge now, and I think we're kind of desperate and hopeless, and we don't know how to continue. So we're not taking that responsibility, and I think that's the really heartbreaking bit. We don't have a new idea about who we want to be, who we want, what we want this country to be, and I think that's a bit of the tragedy at the moment. There's no fantasy of a good, better future.
Well, things have looked more things are not looking as positive as they once did. That's clear.
Yeah.
Those are pretty much my questions. So I invite some folks in the audience to kind of, if you've been anything that you wanted to bring up, your reaction. Go ahead, Stanley.
So first of all, Yael, I want to compliment you. It's a wonderful film. I found myself very engaged with it. And I think you must be a very good interviewer because you drew out, I think, really significant things from the folks you interviewed. So what I was wondering was this. You interviewed a specific group of people who were classmates, many of whom are still living in the same area. They're from a particular social class, as you say, and environment and so on. So I'm a psychologist, and I think about, well, how much can you generalize from this group to the rest of Israel, which has so many, different dimensions. Like there were no religious folks in this group, it would seem. And how would that look if you had interviewed that group or some other ethnicity and so on? So I wonder if you can speak to that. Maybe that wasn't your intention, but you are talking in some respects in generality. So do you generalize or you have in mind to do the same thing in Jerusalem or such?
Yeah, it's really, first of all, thank you for the compliment, and also thank you for the fantastic question. Because I think, when you make films, you have to then write and propose and start financing. And I was looking for money in Israel, and I was looking for money in Germany. And when in Germany, my partners here asked me, why this? And I said, okay, you're all fascinated with Israel, but you see Shtisel, right? It was also, you see like Orthodox religious in Jerusalem, you see settlers, you see kibbutz. That's not Israel. If you want to understand Israel, you have to understand Petach Tikva. Like the big, of course, Jerusalem is a very specific place. There's nowhere else like Jerusalem, and there's no people like the people who grew up in Jerusalem. And kibbutz is kibbutz, and settlements are the settlements, and the Orthodox are the Orthodox, and the national religious, whatever. But this kind of secular, this middle class center of Israel, middle life, like say it was midlife, middle Israel, middle class. That was the description,
The elevator pitch.
And yeah, and it sounds, and nobody wants to see, like documentaries, people always want to be like the first transgender who flew to the moon, like that. She's like, I want to do something about like the most normal people in Israel. But to a great extent, this is the country. And also if you drive around Israel, you see Petach Tikva everywhere. So Petach Tikva is every single city in Israel has these incredible high risers, and they all have their bomb shelters, and they all so of course there could be slight differences in different areas in Israel, and of course much bigger differences if it's Jerusalem or Haifa or religious or whatever, but I think secular Israel, middle class secular Israel, these people represent very well. And I think maybe the people who used to be like, also politically, I think when we were growing up, half of our parents were voting Likud and half of our parents were voting Ma'arach, or maybe more Ma'arach, like Labour Party. We were just, this kind of middle class that felt that the country was ours, the country is us. So of course, there's it doesn't exactly represent the entire country, but it shows something of the, let's say, the soft belly of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Thank
much.
you. That's very helpful. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Also this calling, just we were talking about the name of the film before, calling the film Petach Tikva in Hebrew is, I don't know if there is in the United States a place like that all the jokes are about. In Germany, there's a place like that. There's Bielefeld. Like, it's the most undistinct, boring, general place that nobody wants to live in. Then all the jokes are always about Petach Tikva. And Petach Tikva means opening of hope. And so to call a film that has a certain irony, it's a bit of a provocation in Israel.
Okay. I think in the States we have podunk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever been there? Yeah.
No, I don't think anyone's ever been, but it's like, that may, that it's like the armpit of the country.
Exactly. So there were, but Petach Tikva used to be the fourth. I think now it's the fifth biggest city in Israel. Everybody hates it because it's an exact mirror of everybody else. Like, it's exactly, the whole country is Petach Tikva, actually. So the jokes are about it because it's so representative and so average. And so, I think,
you're seeing predictions of demographics that the Haredim are increasing share of the country, and that more and more of the burden of defending and supporting the country financially will fall on this middle class. But yet this middle class has the option to leave.
But they don't leave, right? And which shows how ideological we still are. I think, I guess it's going to change in the next years, but already now, there's this contradiction, because I'm sure most of you know Israel and how Israel was in the past, but it was a much more modest place in the past. So these people, on one hand, they're much more often abroad, they eat out more often, they have more beautiful homes, but they work way longer hours than my parents ever worked. And when they're not working, they're in traffic jams on the way to work or on the way back. And so the country is full. It's really an amazing, I think Israel doubles every 25 years since it was founded. So when I think of the country I grew up in, and I have this imagination that it's emptier, it was indeed emptier. There were less than half the people. I think I remember when Israel was 4 million, that was like a thing, on Independence Day, they always say, how many are we now? Right. And so it's very, it's full, it's dense, it's intense. So the task of defending and protecting it, but also just the financial burden is falling on these people that you saw in the film.
Do you think the next generation, or do you have a sense of that if the next generation will be less patriotic and less inclined to stay and bear that burden?
Well, if being younger people are more nationalist at the moment. I don't see that as patriotic, exactly, but they are, and you see, how they vote, etc. So the people in their teens, in their 20s, are more, more nationalistic, if you ask me. They vote more right wing anyway.
So the,
Um,
so the center is going to hold for now, at least as in the foreseeable future, as you see it.
just because one can't imagine what happens when it stops holding.
Yeah.
Like what is the alternative? It's it's holding also, it's full of fantastic creative people, Israel. It's it has a true human fortune. And that's also where the hope is,
Okay, all right,
good people. There are good people in Israel.
okay.
Yeah. So,
I was also struck right from the beginning, particularly, I guess, among the earlier interviewees, of just how strongly family oriented they were. They talked so much about that. And, again, as you say, they lived close to where their parents were, and they would see it as a betrayal if they left them and so on. I think it's partly a generational thing, but also maybe, they're the children of immigrants by and large. And you don't see that as much anymore in this generation and in this country. But there it was, and it's earlier forms, I would say.
yeah, I mean, it has a few reasons, right? First of all, the country is smaller, so staying, if you're from New Jersey and your kid moves to Chicago, but
Right.
but it's funny, this Moran, she talks about moving to Hulon from Petah Tikva. I think it's like 10 kilometers, that she couldn't bear it to be away from her mom. But I think it's also about as I said, my generation has more children than our parents, but we work harder and we spend more time in traffic. So you can't, and the social structures are weaker, and the childcare, etc. So you can't have 4 kids without grandparents helping. So it's also, this glue gets stronger and stronger all the time, because it's emotional, but it's also practical. It's and sometimes I really envy it, but it's a complex structure, but you can really think of it as a beehive. There's kind of a collective.
It's resilient, yes, and
Yeah, and people are not. People are never alone, but they're also just never alone.
Well, and also some of them were sort of questioning at this age. I mean, Udi talked about identity, asking themselves, am I happy? Is this what I want? Is this what I imagined? That if they weren't in crisis, they were at least very sort of reflective and somewhat disgruntled with being in the role that many of them were in, the women.
Yeah.
I'm talking about particularly.
I think also because it's, again, these two sets of values, because on one hand, we're part of the Western world. We were told to fulfill ourselves, be happy, live our own lives. We got freedom is everything, whatever. And on the other hand, we're not. So I think a lot of frustration comes from that. Maybe maybe their mothers maybe thought about it differently. I don't know how how they felt about their life when they were 40, but I think that's a lot of. I think it's really interesting because I met these people, many of them only once. It looks like it was researched intensely, but meeting a mother of 3. I always say it's harder than getting an appointment with the chief of staff of the military. Like it was all about phone calls, from the speakerphone in the car on the way back from work or to work, or picking up kids and whatever. They said, okay, you want to film? Sure. Just come at 8:30. I think the kids are going to be out till then. So, and also it kind of determined the visual language of the film, because it was always about like rolling tiny like socks everywhere, and picking up toys and hoping the kids won't wake up so we can finish the interview. And in the end, we decided to keep all of this because that was, it was almost this guerrilla, shoot. We came with the sound and the camera and said, okay, so are you happy? And it's and something very authentic came back. It's like, I'm exhausted,
Yeah.
But they were all, I think, all of them, I was all very, very impressed by how reflected, how much, like how smart, how many interesting things they have to say about themselves. Yeah.
So, anything to say about whatever's next in the works for you, or do you want any teasers for coming attractions?
I'm working. So in parallel to this last film, I work in I do video installations for museums here. And if you are ever visiting, any of you in Berlin, there's a new permanent exhibition in the Jewish Museum here, and I'm in charge of the last room with my good friend Clemens Walter. We have a multi-screen installation, 21 screens with 53 different kinds of Jewish people living in Germany now. What does it mean to be Jewish in Germany now? And I'm continuing that, and I am researching for an installation in the Jewish Museum here again, Jewish life in East Germany. So Jewish communists, the people who didn't come to Israel to build a kibbutz, but came or went back to Germany to build a communist new paradise ideal society. A lot of people who came back from the US also. And that's so I'm finally, for the first time in my career, moving a bit further away from my own identity.
Okay. So we should stop by in the Jewish Museum and check it out.
Anyway, it's going to be here for the next 15 years. It's a permanent exhibition. So It's a room, and it exists, and it's looped. Okay. And you're all very invited. And there's even an online version for it's a series called 4 Questions. It has English subtitles. It's like the Pesach 4 Questions. What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be Jewish in Germany? Where is your home? Like that.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. It was a pleasure.